The world is reeling, and they're in shock after the release of yet another video allegedly showing the brutal beheading of a second American journalist. Political leaders, including President Obama, Prime Minister Stephen Harper, expressing outrage and denouncing the act as barbaric, unspeakable, and despicable. But how should the U.S. and Canada and other countries respond to the growing threat from ISIS? Are targeted strikes on ISIS posts in Iraq the right response? Joining me now by phone, James Bezan, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defence. In Montreal, Alain Laverdière, the NDP's International Development Critic and Deputy Critic for Foreign Affairs. And in Vancouver, Joyce Murray is the Liberal Defence Critic. Let's talk about this horrific video that allegedly shows the beheading of journalist Steven Sotloff. Mr. Bezan, given the response to ISIS, is Canada considering a more robust response to the growing threat of ISIS?
Well, first of all, Evan, let me express my condolences to the Sotloff family and all their friends. I know that they're in everybody's thoughts and prayers right now. This video, again, just reaffirms that ISIS or ISIL or whoever you're supposed to call them, they're a violent terrorist organization that needs to be stopped. And, we're proud to be part of the global community that is acting together to fight terrorism. And Canada has done a number of things to fight terrorism, both on a global scale and here at home as well. So
what does that mean? I mean, practically, this threat's growing. You know, this is coming partly because of the situation in Syria, where some of these very Islamist groups are the very groups that are fighting against Bashar al-Assad. It's not simple. Canada won't send military arms there. We didn't get involved in Iraq, which is rapidly becoming a failed state, obviously, with ISIS. What practically can Canada do to stop ISIS?
Well, first of all, on the Iraq file, we are sending a lot of humanitarian assistance over, as well as with Syrian refugees and helping countries deal with the inflow of people coming from these battle zones. And we are very, very concerned about what's happening with religious minorities, especially as they come under the control of ISIS. And so we are participating with our allies in delivering humanitarian aid as well as military equipment for the fight that's taking place right now. We do have a C-17 Globemaster involved, as well as Hercules aircraft in supplying those supplies from our allies. So we are participating, but we understand that we have to do more in making sure that our security agencies have the tools and the resources to combat terrorism at home and abroad and continue protecting Canadians right here at home.
Alain Laverdière, Canada currently is sending 2 military planes, about $5 million in humanitarian aid in terms of the Kurdish forces, and lots more in terms of, obviously, the humanitarian crisis in Syria. But ISIS is a very specific threat. Humanitarian aid may not cut it if ISIS takes over large swaths of Iraq and Syria, as they've already done. In your party's view, in your view, should Canada step up on a military level to do more to stop ISIS?
Well, first, let me say that I was as well shocked by the video, and that all my thoughts go to the family and friends, of course. It's really terrible what's happening there. Key, as usual, is to work closely with our partners and support the efforts of other countries and coordinate efforts. I also think that it would be worth having a good discussion in the House of Commons about the situation, the options that are open to us, and what should be the way forward. This is a threat to global security, and, we're still on this planet, so it's a threat to us, finally. So I think it would be very interesting, very
important.
Options,
why don't you tell us what options, in your party's view, are on the table? What would the NDP propose?
I think there's a range of options that need to be discussed. Of course, humanitarian assistance is absolutely essential. Taking in refugees from Syria is also very important, and on that note, I think that the government's really not doing enough on that side. But I think we need to coordinate with partners, but also have a frank and long discussion in the House of Commons.
Okay, but I guess my question is, discuss exactly what options. Joyce Murray, what's your view on the options available?
Well, Evan, in terms of this latest tragedy, I would call this group ISIS inhumane, just to add to your lists of adjectives. Very heartbreaking to see the lengths that they'll go to, not just with these individual beheadings, also their targeting of hundreds of thousands of people of different ethnic and religious minorities. So a horrific group, absolutely. We were long calling for humanitarian assistance, and we're glad to see that Canada is providing that, as well as the transport of military equipment to the Kurdish region. I would agree and support my colleagues' contention that this is about coordinated action with other partners, with international partners. We need to be doing more in terms of humanitarian assistance and protection, and we need to work together with other countries.
Okay, so tough to get details on that one, but I guess this is all a challenge, whether it's ISIS or whether it's in Europe, Russia, and the situation in Ukraine. The NATO meeting in Wales this week is absolutely crucial. The Secretary General, Rasmussen, I spoke to him on CBC Radio's The House, and he said Canada's got to start paying more and contributing more to NATO. He called it an insurance policy. Listen to what he had to say.
NATO is an insurance, a security insurance, and for an insurance you pay a premium. Now the premium has gone up because of this unstable security environment, and that's why we need more defense investments in the coming years.
That's Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the Secretary General of NATO, hosting the meeting. I also spoke today to the former Foreign Affairs Minister, John Manley, who Stephen Harper appointed to head the panel on Afghanistan. Here's what he had to say about what Canada should do.
I've always believed that we need to put more into our defense commitments because, quite frankly, I think that's the price of having a seat at the table where we actually can influence outcomes in organizations like NATO. And we can't let the United States pay for everything and then wonder why they do things that we don't really like.
Mr. Bezan, will Canada, as a member of NATO, spend their 2% on GDP on military equipment? Will they pay for the insurance policy and have the action follow the words?
Well, look at Evan. We've always been a proud member of NATO and have pitched in when we've needed to, and we are right now. We have, troops on the ground in Poland. We have CF-18 fighter jets doing air policing in the Baltic states. We have the HMCS Toronto as part of the NATO Maritime Task Force in the Eastern Mediterranean. I was recently in Ukraine again with the Royal Canadian Air Force, moving non-kinetic military equipment into Ukraine to assist them in their battle with Russia. So, we have always stepped up. We've always participated, and we'll continue to do so.
But the question is, are we participating enough? You and I, the facts are that NATO wants Canada to spend 2% of its GDP on defense. Canada currently spends 1.3% of its GDP on defense, much less than the UK, much less than the United States. In other words, if Canada wants to punch above its weight, if Canada wants to put steel behind its words on this, will Canada commit more money to defense and to NATO?
Our military budget in Canada has gone up since we came into office by over 27%. That's almost $4 billion more in spending than what we made when we took over from the Liberals. So instead of going through a decade of darkness, we have actually invested in the Canadian Armed Forces. We have bought new aircraft. We have put new armored vehicles on the ground. We've increased the size of the men and women who are in uniform to over 87,000 people now. So the members of the Canadian Armed Forces know that they have the kit and the equipment that they need to do the job, which they were denied for over a decade by the previous government.
Okay. I'm going to quickly go to Ms. Laverdiere. Ms. Laverdiere, the NATO Secretary General clearly disagrees with what Mr. Bezan said. He said to me, the insurance premium has now gone up in an unstable security environment. It's basically suggesting the past is no longer the baseline, the future is the baseline. In your view, should Canada pay more on defense and contribute more to NATO?
Well, I think we should first manage the defense budget we have properly. I mean, under this government, we've seen procurement fiasco after procurement fiasco. So it's important that the men and women who serve Canada have the proper equipment to do their job. It's also important to treat them well afterwards. But let's start by managing the budget properly and efficiently.
Yeah, but that's a different, hey, but with all due respect, Russia's not working along your budget timeline. The threat's now. NATO's calling for something now. What's the answer now? I mean, threats, unfortunately, don't comply with budgetary consultations.
Oh, well, it's not really budgetary consultations. It's a matter of managing the money, and it's being mismanaged right now. But a threat like, rapid reaction force, I think this could be an option to reassure also our NATO partners and members who are in the region from the former USSR. So this is important, but I think from a budgetary to 2% or 1.3, the first step is to manage the budget properly.
All right, last word to Joyce Murray. What's your view on Canada's contribution to NATO given the current threat?
Okay, well, thank you for that, putting it that way, Evan, because I want to talk about both leadership contribution and financial contribution. This NATO meeting is extremely important for coordinating and bringing the NATO members and partners together. It's an opportunity for Canada to step up. This Prime Minister has actually done a very poor job on that. Been a lot of warlike rhetoric and not much else. So he really has the opportunity to extend the discussion of a coordinated approach to long-term peace and security, even beyond the partners and members of NATO. I'd love to see him step up in leadership. He hasn't done that so far. In terms of money, it's actually more like 1% of GDP. It's equivalent to what Spain or the Slovak Republic spends that Canada is spending now on our military budget.
Well, would the Liberals increase that?
According to the World Bank, it is the lowest that that Canada has ever spent since the tracking started in the 1980s. And so what I would say, Evan, the big challenge is the big gap between the warlike rhetoric of this government and this Prime Minister.
But would the Liberals put more money to defense? That's what I want to know.
It's too early to say. We need to see what comes out of this NATO meeting. But what we cannot do is pretend to have a big investment in the armed forces while doing the most major cuts that any other country has seen, and having a budget that is back to 2007 and as a percentage of GDP lower than anything since the 80s.
All right, I got to leave it there. James Bezan, Alain Laverdiere, and Joyce Murray on the situation with ISIS, also the situation with NATO. We're watching that conference very closely as the Prime Minister in the UK and heading to that NATO conference in Wales.